Hello everyone, it's good to see you all again. Welcome in, ladies, gentlemen, gentle thems, gentle fluids, gentle beings, and however else you may happen to identify. I am Rustam, the hero of the Persian Empire, reborn in the modern day to battle evil on the internet. Welcome everyone to the new Persian Empire. Tonight, we are once again embarking, or perhaps re-embarking, on a campaign against the forces of insomnia. For what could be more evil than not getting a good night of sleep? That's why we have decided to ride out tonight, to combat those forces, with some stories from the Shahnameh. Of course, the first things first, let's just adjust this. There we go. Actually, alright. I think that should work a bit better for now. I guess seeing VideoTube is going to become a bit of a regular thing on these campaigns. I apologize for that. I'll need to find the time to install some filters so that the sound of my AC is no longer an issue in future campaigns. But for now, let's just relax and enjoy some stories together. I hope that sounds good. Now then, let's see where we left off last time. Ah, yes. When we left off, the prophesied hero Faridun fought with the evil King Zahak and incarcerated him in Damavand Mountain, as he had been prophesied to do so. Now we move on to chapter 31. Faridun reigned for 500 years. He sits on the throne, and his mother hears the glad tidings. I think this is one instance where we can safely say that this is a bit of an exaggeration. Probably. After all, a human reigning for 500 years sounds like, it sounds like an impossibility. When Faridun's mother, Faranak, heard of her son's triumphant coronation, she offered thanks to God and gave alms to the poor. She sought out Atbin's royal robes. For those who may have forgotten, Atbin was the father of Faridun. So Faranak sought out his royal robes, his mailed coat, visor, lance, sword, helmet, and belt from the royal chest in which she had carefully preserved them, and placing them on the back of a camel, dispatched them to her son. Faridun was overjoyed to receive his father's cherished robes and arms. He wore the crown on the auspicious day, Ahura Mazda of the month, Meher. After securing himself on the throne, he made an extensive tour of his possessions, and wherever he went, he converted wastelands into gardens and meadows. The Jashan, or festival on the day Meher of the month Meher, owes its origin to him. When he was 50 years old, he was blessed with 3 sons of royal bearing. My goodness, he really had kids quite late in life. And 3 of them, no less. Triplets, huh? No, not triplets. The 2 elders were begotten of Shahnameh, and the youngest one of Arnavaz. He loved them so much that he could not bear to give them any name for a number of years. Wait, how on earth do you love a child so much that you forget to name them? That makes no sense. Unless by any name we're referring to an official position, perhaps? Like the position of Crown Prince? I guess that would make sense if they were all the same age. You wouldn't know which one to give the title to. So you would probably want to wait to see which one of them was worthy of becoming your successor. Please excuse me 1 second. I need to go and get my water bottle. I seem to have placed it out of reach. That's some good water. Remember to keep hydrating, everyone. Fall might be upon us, but heat is still very much an issue. Make sure to take good care of yourselves. Alright, let's get back to the story. Chapter 32. Faridun sends Jandal to the Shah of Yaman to ask for his daughter's hands in marriage to his sons. Faridun instructed the wisest man of his court, Jandal, to undertake a worldwide tour in order to select 3 princesses for marriage to his sons. The criteria for selection, as imposed by Faridun, were all the 3 princesses should be the daughters of the same father and mother. They should be fairy-faced, of royal bearing, and identical in appearance and stature, so that it would be difficult to distinguish one from the other. The parents should have brought them up with such love and devotion that they could not bear to give them names as yet. That seems to be a very specific set of conditions. Also, betrothal, really? You couldn't just ask your sons for their thoughts on the matter? Speaking of which, why on earth would you not be able to give them names? I thought that that might simply refer to being unable to give them an actual title, but to literally not name any of them? That's kind of messed up. What does it mean to be fairy-faced, exactly? Also, having them all be hard to distinguish from each other, that sounds like a recipe for disaster. Jandal, after traveling over different parts of the world, at last found what he wanted in the royal palace of the Shah of Yaman. He conveyed Faridun's desire to the Shah and suggested that his daughters would be eminently suitable for marriage to Faridun's sons. The Shah of Yaman was grieved to hear this, for he could not bear to become separated from his daughters. Understandable. He made Jandal comfortable in the guest house and then conferred with his chieftains. He told them that he did not like parting with his beloved daughters, but at the same time he feared to incur the wrath of Faridun, who was the most powerful king in those days. The chieftains exhorted him not to be afraid of Faridun, for their arms were strong enough to help him in case Faridun attacked Yaman. In the same breath, however, they said it would not be expedient to incur Faridun's wrath. The Shah of Yaman felt confusion worse confounded by the ambiguous talks of the chieftains. Yeah, I guess that's understandable. I mean, why on earth would they say one thing and then another? We shouldn't be afraid of Faridun. Our military force is equal to his, but at the same time we shouldn't make him upset. That seems like they're trying to preserve their pride while at the same time acknowledging that they really don't stand a chance. In any case, let's see the Shah of Yaman's reply to Faridun's ambassador. The Shah of Yaman sent for Faridun's ambassador and told him that he felt highly flattered by the illustrious monarch's proposal and did not have the least hesitation in accepting it, but he would very much like to see the prospective bridegrooms first. If he were to find them to be virtuous, he would get them married according to his rites and send them along with their husbands. Jandal returned with the Shah of Yaman's message and conveyed it to Faridun. Faridun sent for his sons and told them how lucky they were to seek the hands in marriage of such lovely princesses. He advised them to hear carefully whatever the Shah of Yaman had to say, and then give suitable, intelligent, truthful replies in the most polite manner. He exhorted them to cultivate knowledge in preference to wealth. He intuitively anticipated that the Shah of Yaman would bring out his 3 daughters, all having the same stature and identical in appearance. The order of presentation of the princesses would be that the youngest would be in front, the eldest behind, and the middle one in between the two. If the Shah were to ask them to identify who was the youngest, the eldest, and the middle one, they should not get confused. Chapter 34. Faridun's sons appear before the Shah of Yaman. The three princes, with advisors and escort, left for Yaman. Sarv, the Shah of Yaman, gave them a grand reception. The people showered pearls and saffron upon them. They were served with wine reinforced with musk. Reinforced with musk? I hope that they didn't reinforce it with Elon. If they did, it's not going to be very good wine. Dinars, gold coins, were scattered at their feet. Accommodation was arranged in a palace constructed out of golden and silver bricks, and which was lined by Byzantine silk sheets. Was Byzantine around at this time? I'm not quite sure. I don't think so, though. No, I'm pretty sure that Byzantine wasn't around back then. But why don't we look that up? Let's see. Byzantine Empire. Continuation of the Roman Empire during late antiquity and the Middle Ages. (395 CE until 1453). Well, that doesn't line up with the Persian Empire at all. So I guess they must have just managed to get Byzantine silks from the future somehow. Who knows? The Shah of Yaman brought out his 3 daughters, who were identical in appearance and stature. They marched forth in the same order as Faridun had anticipated. The princes, therefore, had no difficulty in identifying who was the youngest and who was the eldest. The Shah was amazed, and had no option but to give his daughters in marriage to the 3 princes. The youngest married the youngest. The eldest took the hand of the eldest, and the middle one was given to the middle one. After the nuptial festivities were over, the Shah arranged for the sleeping accommodation of the princes by the side of a cistern filled with rose water, in the garden beneath a tree full of flowers. His idea was to test their physical fitness, whether they would be able to withstand the severe cold of the desert night. The princes survived the ordeal thanks to their superb physique. The Shah of Yaman had now no valid excuse to hold back the princesses. So in the presence of an assembly of distinguished nobles and courtiers, he handed over the brides to the princes and gave them a grand send-off. Faridun's sons return from Yaman. Faridun tests them. When Faridun heard of the impending arrival of his sons, he decided upon a stratagem to test their valor. He assumed the form of a dragon and came charging and breathing fire at them. Wait, so now he can just turn into a dragon? Where did that come from? Just straight up shape-shifting out of nowhere. That's cool, but at the same time, kind of a twist I wasn't expecting. The eldest son, on seeing a dragon, said to himself, "It is not wise to fight with a dragon." He turned tail and fled. The second son, instinctively, drew out his bow and put the arrow in it. He had second thoughts, however, as the dragon came nearer, lost his nerve, and fled. The youngest son shouted at the dragon and ordered it to get out of their way. He asked the dragon to bear in mind that he and his brothers were the sons of Faridun, who knew well how to counteract black magic. He warned the dragon that he and his brothers were armed with maces and would not hesitate to smash its head if it did not get out of their way. When Faridun heard this, he vanished from their sight. Assuming his original human form, he first offered thanks to God, whom he considered to be the author of both good and evil. He then came out at the head of his courtiers and his soldiers to accord his sons a warm welcome. He disclosed that it was he who had come to them in the guise of a dragon, in order to test their reaction to dangerous situations. On the basis of their reactions, he decided to name them as follows. The eldest was named Salm, which means safety-seeking, because he never hesitated to flee at the first sign of danger. Wow, you just have to roast him with his own name, huh? Speaking of which, it's spelled S-A-L-M. Is that Salm? Sam? What? How do you pronounce that? To prevent Salm from feeling crestfallen, he said that if one were to rush recklessly towards an elephant or a lion, he should be considered a madman and not a brave person. So in short, he basically said that it's actually kind of smart to seek safety when you're facing something that you know you can't beat. To the second son, who at first showed bravado but turned tail on second thoughts, he gave the name Tur. I wonder what that means. The youngest son impressed him the most, both on account of not giving way to recklessness, as well as his steadfastness in the face of danger. He was named Iraq. That's spelled E-E-R-A-C-H. Salm's wife was named Arzui, desire, Tur's Ma-e-Azad Kui, independent spirited moon, and Iraq's bride, Sahi, meaning straight. Wow. Desire, independent spirited moon, and then they're straight. Just straight. Faridun then consulted the astrologers about his son's future. Salam's horoscope revealed Jupiter in Sagittarius. Tur's rising sign was Leo, whose lord the sun is. A fellow Leo. Wonderful. Iraq's rising sign was Cancer, whose lord the moon is. This forebode evil, indicating a life full of strife and danger. Faridun was always worried about Iraq, since he found that the stars were not favorable to his beloved son. Chapter 36. Faridun divides his kingdom among his sons. When Faridun saw that Iraq was not destined to live long, he decided to distribute his kingdom straight away among his sons, so that they may reign independently over their portions. Salam was given the whole of Rum, Byzantium, and all the land to the west of Iran. Tur got Turan, Turkestan and China, i.e. the entire land to the east of Iran. The favorite son Iraq was given Iran and Arabia. The three brothers ruled happily until Faridun became old and infirm. Seeds of dissension now started to be sown. Salam becomes envious of Iraq and incites Tur against him. Salam was consumed with envy and hatred of Iraq, and sent a messenger post-haste to his brother Tur in Turkestan. He expressed dissatisfaction at the way Faridun had distributed his kingdom. He felt that he, being the eldest, should have been given sovereignty over the mother country, Iran, according to the age-old tradition, even if he was bypassed for some reason best known to their father. He felt that Tur should have been the next choice, and not Iraq, who was the youngest of the three. Tur, who did not possess much native sense, was thus incited to fury against Iraq. He sent back the messenger with the reply that he agreed with Salam, and that they should take immediate steps to rectify the injustice done to them. In order not to lose any time, both the conspiring brothers started from the cities simultaneously, met each other halfway, and started conspiring against Iraq. This is why you designate a single crown prince from the start and make sure the others know their place. Doing otherwise will always invite some manner of sibling feud. What a shame. Salam and Tur send a message to Faridun. They selected an intelligent courier with a facile tongue. Salam, the eldest son, briefed him about what he should say to Faridun. The burden of their message was that Faridun did grave injustice to the two elder sons at the expense of the youngest by giving him the mother country to rule, while they themselves were shunted to far-off bleak regions of Faridun's vast kingdom. They gave an ultimatum to Faridun that if he did not divest Iraq of the crown which he had been conferred, they would invade Iran with their armies from Byzantium, Turkestan, and China, lay waste to Iran, and kill Iraq. The smart courier rode haste until he came to Faridun's palace, and delivered the message of defiance to the emperor. When Faridun heard the message, he was boiling with rage. Controlling his anger as best he could, he conveyed to the courier his reply to the accusations leveled against him by his sons. He admonished his sons for their animosity arising out of envy and greed. He assured them that he had consulted his courtiers and astrologers, and had divided the kingdom equitably after considering all aspects. He exhorted them not to sell their conscience to Adiman, the evil spirit, for a piece of land. Chapter 40. Faridun talks to Iraq about the behavior of Salam and Tur. As soon as the courier left Faridun sent for Iraq and told him how Salm and Tur had threatened to invade Iran. He advised Iraq to prepare himself to resist them. Iraq made it clear to Faridun that nobody stays forever in this world. For the sake of a few years' existence, he did not want to incur the hatred of his brothers, and was quite willing to give up his crown and country if that would please his brothers. He was prepared to go to his brothers all alone, without any army or escort, to convince them of his bona fides. Faridun appreciated Iraq's noble gesture, but feared that the brothers would not be amenable to his offer of peace. On the contrary, they would find some excuse to harm him. He therefore cautioned Iraq against going without escort. Iraq goes to Salm and Tur with Faridun's letter. Faridun wrote a letter to Salm and Tur advising them that he was not at all anxious to continue as king any longer, and that Iraq also had decided to give up his rights to the throne in deference to their wishes. Straight from the throne, Iraq had jumped on to the saddle, in his anxiety to be with them as soon as possible. He asked them to realize that Iraq was younger than they, and therefore in need of their affection and protection. He expressed his desire and hope that they would keep Iraq with them as long as they pleased, and then send him back safe and sound. The letter was sealed and delivered to Iraq, who started with a few elderly advisors and some young bodyguards. Salm and Tur received Iraq with the customary formalities. When their soldiers saw Iraq, they were so impressed by his grand personality that, while dispersing after giving the guard of honor, they formed themselves into pairs and went on expressing their admiration for Iraq. They expressed their earnest conviction that if anyone was fitted to wear the crown, it was Iraq and none else. The spontaneous gesture on the part of the soldiers did not go unnoticed by Salm and Tur. After Iraq was made comfortable in his quarters, Salm pointed out to Tur how the soldiers admired Iraq, and expressed his fear that they would never, under the circumstances, go against Iraq. Their own position, then, would remain insecure so long as Iraq was alive. The only way to retain their hold upon their soldiers was to do away with Iraq. At least, so they thought. Towards this end they plotted throughout the night, while Iraq was sleeping soundly. Chapter 42. Death of Iraq at the hands of his brothers. Man. Soon after sunrise, the two evil plotting brothers went towards Iraq's tent. As soon as Iraq saw them coming out, he ran out of his tent, overcome with brotherly affection and full of joy, to welcome them. The two brothers went with Iraq inside the tent, and immediately Tur started finding fault with Iraq that their father had given him the kingdom of Iran, in spite of his being the youngest of the three. Iraq pleaded with them that he was not at all anxious to rule over Iran, and would be only too willing to hand over his crown and regalia to them, if that would please them. He merely wanted to live in peace and to enjoy the goodwill of his brothers. The brothers, however, were so envious of Iraq's noble qualities that this display of magnanimity by Iraq served as a red rag to a bull. They were mad with anger, and hardened their hearts, and made up their minds to kill him on the spot. Tur picked up the massive gold chair, and struck Iraq with it. Iraq entreated his brothers, even at this stage, not to kill him, because he had no animosity towards them. He pointed out that his murder, without any provocation on his part, would not go unavenged. He said it was a sin to take life, even if it be that of a harmless ant, because life is as much precious and sweet to an ant as it is to any human being. Only a person with a black interior and a heart of stone would desire to injure the feelings of an ant. These couplets with Ferdowsi puts in the mouth of Iraq are oft quoted and famous. But blinded with hatred and envy, Tur took out his dagger and stabbed Iraq repeatedly until he gave up the ghost, and his dead body was covered all over with blood. Ferdowsi here addresses the revolving earth, accusing it of raising a person to the sky at one moment, and then hurtling him to the depths of degradation at another. He then advises elderly, experienced persons not to put their trust in this world. Tur then severed Iraq's head from the body and stuffed the skull with musk and incense, and sent it to Faridun with the derisive statement, "Here is the head of one whom you gave the kingdom of Iran." The unjust murderers then returned to their respective provinces, one to China and the other to Rum. Iraq's coffin is brought to Faridun. Faridun was anxiously awaiting for Iraq to return. Elaborate preparations were made to accord a right royal welcome. Just then, a messenger arrived post haste on a fast courier camel, and brought the golden coffin containing Iraq's severed head. Faridun was shocked. His joy turned into sorrow. He went into mourning along with his courtiers. He now wanted to live for only one purpose. His earnest prayer to God was that the Almighty may grant him life, just long enough for him to have the satisfaction of seeing someone from Iraq's family growing up and cutting off the heads of the tyrants Salm and Tur, who killed their innocent and noble brother without any provocation. Faridun discovered that one of Iraq's favorite wives, named Ma Afrid, was pregnant. This raised hopes in Faridun's breast that she may give birth to a son who would grow up and avenge Iraq's murder. When, however, she gave birth to a daughter, Faridun's hopes of early revenge were now deferred. Why? A daughter could take revenge just as easily. He brought up Iraq's daughter with love and affection, and got her married to Pashang, who was Faridun's brother's son. The aged monarch's joy knew no bounds when Iraq's daughter gave birth to a son, who was a mirror image of Iraq in appearance. He named the newborn child Mino Chair. Faridun's eyesight, that had been dimmed by constant mourning, was restored on hearing the hope-inspiring joyful news of Mino Chair's birth. As Mino Chair grew up, he was taught all the arts and skills of administration and warfare. All courtiers and warriors of Faridun, such as Karan, son of Kaveh, Shirui, Garshasp, Sam, son of Nariman, Kobad, son of Kaveh, and Kashvad, son of Karan, promised allegiance to Mino Chair. When Salm and Tur heard that Mino Chair was born, and that elaborate preparations were being made to avenge Iraq's death, they became alarmed and decided to pacify Faridun by sending a wise messenger who had the gift of the gab. They took special care to send costly presents to Faridun and every one of his courtiers and warriors. The purport of the message sent by the two guilty brothers was that they repented from the depths of their hearts for what they had done. It was written in the book of fate that they should listen to the prompting of the devil and do such a ghastly deed. They threw themselves at the mercy of Faridun, and were willing to make amends if Faridun thought it fit to send Mino Chair to them. They pledged their word that they would stand at Mino Chair's feet like slaves, and hand over their crown and kingdom to him. Faridun received the messenger with traditional courtesy. The knight Shapur constructed the messenger
to Faridun's presence, which was sitting on the throne in the royal court, with Mino Cher by his side. Faridun listened carefully to the messenger. Faridun's reply to Salm and Tur's message in return of the messenger. Faridun replied that he did not want to have any dealings with murderers. He said that not satisfied with Iraq's blood, they were now plotting to invite Mino Cher and do away with him. They will have the satisfaction of seeing Mino Cher only at the head of his troops, in full armor, and accompanied by valiant knights such as Karan, Shapur, Nastu, Shiroi, and the rulers of Daliman and Yaman. He pointed out that he himself could have sought to avenge his son's death much earlier, but thought it proper to wait for a direct descendant of Iraq to come up and to do so. Mino Cher would soon be coming in the company of Nariman's son Sam and Jamshid's son Garshasp. Only one who sows the seeds of tyranny is not destined to see good days or enter heaven. Faridun showed disgust at the idea of Salm and Tur sending costly gifts, offerings, and presents, for he remarked he was not a trader who bartered the head of a ruler in exchange for gold. One who compounds felony by accepting gold is more despicable than the offspring of a dragon. Well, that's not very nice to dragonborns. The messenger returned post-haste to Salm and to Tur. They put searching questions to him about Faridun's courtiers, warriors, and advisors, his resources, the strength of his army, its commanders. The messenger painted a glowing picture of Mino Cher's court. He described Mino Cher as a living replica of Jamshid, and having the graces of Tamuras, who incarcerated the devils. Mino Cher, he said, was in the company of the valiant Karan, the wise Sarv of the ruler of Yaman, who acted as his advisor, the world-conquering knight Garshasp, with his son Nariman and grandson Sam. Garshasp was carrying 100-mound heavy mace. Shapur and Shiroi were also in the army, and everyone was straining at the leash to avenge Iraq's death. On hearing this, Salm and Tur were struck with awe and fear. They planned to make the best of a bad bargain by taking the initiative and attacking before Mino Cher grew stronger. They gathered forces from China, Turkestan, and the Rum, Byzantium, and marched towards Iran. When Faridun heard that the Turanian forces had reached the other bank of River Jaihun, Oxus, or Amu, he asked Mino Cher to march at the head of his troops to offer battle to the enemy. He told Mino Cher that whenever a young man was in the right, all his enemies, willy-nilly, walk into his trap. With patience, alertness, planning, and wisdom, the most fierce lion can be ensnared. He also expressed his firm belief that an evil person is sure to fall on evil days. Mino Cher, confidently, expressed his hope that he would succeed in avenging the death of his grandfather Iraq. I think I need to take a quick drink of water. Goodness me, that was quite a lot. Chapter 46. Mino Cher leads his forces to battle with Salm and Tur. Mino Cher gathered together his forces, war horses, elephants, and ordered Karan to lead them forth. In the vanguard was the Kaviani standard. Karan led his forces out of the city of Tamisha and advanced at the head of 300,000 soldiers, with drawn swords and carrying heavy maces. Minochair and Karan emerged from the forest of Narvan and regrouped his forces. The left wing of the army was commanded by Garshasp. The right column was under the joint command of Sam and Kobad. Minochair, with Sarv of Yaman, was in the center. Kobad went ahead of the army to gather information about enemy movements. Some distance behind the army was the ruler of Taliman. The scouts of Salm and Tur brought news to them of the approaching army. The two murderers alerted their soldiers, and when Tur came to know that Kobad was far ahead of Minochair's army, he contacted Kobad and tauntingly told him to ask Minochair what business a fatherless king like him had in the battlefield. If Iraq's wife gave birth to a daughter, who gave him the sword, mace, and mailed coat? Kobad promised to convey the insolent message to Minochair, but warned Tur to ponder seriously over the consequences of his evil deeds, and expressed his fear that Tur will not be able to stand against the valor and skill of Minochair's devoted soldiers, who were thirsting to avenge the cowardly assassination of Iraq. On hearing this, Tur became too angry to give vent to any reply, and went back sullenly to his own camp. Kobad came back to Minochair and reported what he had heard. Minochair laughed and said, "Tur is surely a fool to have uttered such rank nonsense. God knows that Iraq is my grandfather, and the propitious Faridun is witness to it. Everybody's pedigree and ability will be disclosed as the battle progresses, and I cut off his head and exhibit it to his soldiers as a retribution for my grandfather's assassination." Karan and the Sarv of Yaman, from the vanguard of the army, exhorted their soldiers not to relax in the course of their battle with the Ahriman, and assured them that whoever died fighting for a just and righteous cause would go straight to heaven, and all his sins would be washed clean. Those who fight valiantly will receive the approbation of the king and the blessings of God. The soldiers with one voice replied that they would fight valiantly to their last breath for their king, crown, and country. Chapter 47. Minochair is deploying his forces for battle against Salm and Tur, and the death of Shirui at the hands of Garshasp. When night turned into day, Minochair organized his forces into battle array. The opposing forces clashed with each other. Oh, looks like the pages were stuck together. Blood flowed like river, and the elephant's legs, covered with blood, appeared as if they were red pillars. A knight named Shirui from the Turanian army came forth to provoke some knight of Minochair's army to single combat. He was of exceptionally massive build. When he rode astride his steed, it seemed as if a mountain was moving. Karan, with drawn sword, rushed forth to engage him. Shirui roared like a lion, and struck his spear against Karan's waist so forcibly that the Iranian knight could not withstand it. Valiant Sam, then, came out to help Karan. Shirui lifted his mace and brought it down on Sam's head with such force that Sam reeled in his saddle, and his helmet was broken to pieces. Karan and Sam then turned tail and rejoined their forces. Flushed with success, Shirui came close to the ranks of the Iranian army and shouted to Minochair, asking him where his strongest knight Garshasp was. He boasted that while Garshasp may be the strongest knight in Iran, even so he was no match for Shirui, who claimed that he was the strongest man in Iran and Turan, and would soon cover Garshasp with the red mailed coat. Basically, cover him with blood. When Garshasp heard this, he came out and gave a mighty roar that shook the earth. On seeing Shirui, he burst out laughing. When Shirui asked him the reason for such a misplaced display of laughter, Garshasp replied that he could not help it, seeing Shirui's puerile eagerness to cross swords with him. Provoked by Garshasp's carefree, frivolous attitude, Shirui charged at Garshasp, who lifted his cow's head-shaped mace from his saddle and brought it down heavily upon Shirui's head. Shirui fell instantly from his horse and rolled in dust and blood for a moment. The brains came out of his skull, and it seemed as if Shirui had never been born, so suddenly did the whole thing happen. Other Turanian soldiers rushed at Garshasp, who played havoc in the enemy ranks by means of his bow and arrow and sharp sword. The fortunes of the day favored Minochair. Salm and Tur were dejected, and planned a surprise attack upon Minochair's forces in the middle of the night. Chapter 48. Tur's surprise attack on Minochair's forces, and Tur's death at the hands of Minochair. The plans of the two murderers to spring a surprise attack upon Minochair's army leaked out. Minochair's scouts warned him in advance and cautioned him to be ready. Minochair entrusted the task of dealing with the surprise attack to Karan. Karan selected a spot where Tur's forces would least expect the Iranian army to be present, and waited in ambush with 30,000 hand-picked soldiers for Tur's forces. At the dead of night, Tur sallied forth silently and in utter darkness towards Minochair's camp, hoping to take the Iranians by surprise. He received a rude shock on finding the Iranian forces waiting for him in full battle array, ready to offer battle. At the same time, Karan, and with his men, fell upon the Turanian army from the opposite side. The hunter became the hunted. Tur found himself completely encircled with all avenues of escape blocked. There was no alternative but to fight desperately. When Minochair saw Tur, he shouted at him and reminded him how brutally he had cut off the innocent Iraq's head. He pointed out that Nemesis was now hot on his trail, and that he would not be able to escape the consequences of his evil deed. Tur was quite unnerved, and turned tail in a desperate bid to escape. Minochair pursued him, and hurled his spear at Tur's back. Tur's dagger fell to the ground from his paralyzed hand. Minochair lifted Tur from his saddle before he could fall, and hurled him onto the ground with great force. Alighting from his steed, he immediately cut off Tur's head, and left his body for the wild animals to devour. Ferdowsi here contemplates upon his favorite theme, that it bewilders him why the revolving heavens look upon someone with the utmost favor at one moment, and then suddenly throws him into the abysmal depths of degradation at the very next moment. He therefore warns human beings never to put their trust in the revolving heavens. For a man who committed to telling a tale of the soldiers and heroes and champions of God, it's rather funny that he has so little faith in the heavens. But I suppose I can vibe with that a bit.
Minochair returned in triumph to his camp. Chapter 49. Minochair's letter to Faridun along with Tur's head. Minochair then wrote a letter to Faridun, wherein he glorified Almighty God for crowning his efforts with success. He praised Faridun's noble qualities, inspired by which he went to Turan and fought 3 battles in 2 days, by day and by night. He described how Tur made a surprise attack at the dead of night, and how he was ambushed by Minochair's forces, how Tur had turned tail, how Minochair pursued him, pierced Tur's mailed coat with his spear, and lifted him up from the saddle, and having thrown him on the ground, severing his head from the body. Minochair assured Faridun that having finished dealing with Tur, he would now be hot on the trail of Salm. He pointed out that he was sending Tur's head stuck on a spear, and enclosed in a golden coffin, in the same manner in which Salm and Tur had shamelessly dealt with Iraq. He vowed that he would hunt out Salm, even if the latter were to hide himself under the deepest sea, or were to ascend as high as the Pleiades, and then would cut off his head. The messenger who carried Minochair's letter felt very much embarrassed at the idea of carrying such a gruesome trophy to Faridun, because however vile and loathsome a son may be, the father is bound to be grief-stricken at his son's death. Tur, however, had committed a heinous crime, and had shown no signs of repentance. Moreover, the avenger, Minochair, was comparatively young, and in the first flush of his youth. The messenger placed Tur's severed head before Faridun, who offered thanks to God that Iraq's death was avenged, and invoked his blessings on Minochair. Chapter 50. Salm comes to know of Tur's death. And Karan captures the fortress of Alan. When Salm came to know of Tur's death, he wept copiously, and decided to take refuge in a fortress which was so high that it seemed to merge into the blue sky. Minochair anticipated such a move on the part of Salm, and decided to cut off Salm's retreat before he gained access to the fortress, which was constructed on the bed of a deep river, and rose so high that not even the bird Huma could fly over it. It was well stocked with provisions and weapons. Minochair revealed his plan to Karan, and also his desire to lay siege to the fortress in person. Karan pleaded with him not to undertake this task himself, but to entrust it to his generals. He volunteered to take a posse of hand-picked soldiers, and requested Minochair to loan him the royal Kavayani standard and Tur's signet ring and seal, so that he may enter the fortress by a stratagem. He selected 6,000 veteran soldiers and took them along the river. On reaching the fortress, he placed Shidui in charge of the soldiers, and told him that he hoped to gain entrance by showing Tur's seal and signet ring to the sentry. Once he managed to gain entry, he would raise the royal standard, on seeing which Shidui would rush in with his men. Accordingly, he accosted the sentry, and said that the victorious Tur had sent him to greet Salm on his victory over Minochair, along with his captured standard. The unsuspecting sentry was taken in on seeing Tur's seal and signet ring, and opened the gates to Karan. Here, Ferdowsi deplores gullibility on the part of unsuspecting persons, and quotes a panther as advising its young to desist from acting on impulse, and to think deeply before taking anyone at his word.
As soon as the day broke, Karan raised the royal standard. Shirui rushed in with his soldiers. Karan and Shirui played havoc with the enemy. By noon, the fortress was razed to the ground. By sunset, they had killed 12,000 of the enemy's men. Women and children came to Karan clamoring for mercy. Karan granted them clemency. He then reported to Minochair the successful capture of the fortress. Minochair praised Karan and wished him well.
Chapter 51. Zahak's grandson Kakuya comes to Salm's help from Dej Huktgang and his death at the hands of Minochair. Minochair then related to Karan how during the latter's absence a new enemy had turned up to offer battle. He was the accursed Kakuya, a grandson of Zahak, and he had brought 100,000 soldiers. Quite a few of Minochair's veteran soldiers were slain during the preliminary skirmishes. Salm's morale was boosted up by the arrival of his ally from Dej Huktgang, whose prowess Minochair had yet to test. Karan offered to engage Kakuya in single combat. Minochair, however, restrained him from saying that he deserved to take rest, having just returned from a successful campaign. The king, then, took his place at the center of the army. A bloody battle took place, and so freely did blood flow that it appeared as if the hands got glued to the hilts with the sticky blood. Such a lot of dust was raised that the air became dark due to the cloud of dust, and the earth took an ebony hue. The weapons were wielded so fast and furious that it seemed as if the swords, maces, and spears had become living objects. At the height of the battle, Kakuya came forward and, spotting Minochair, rushed towards him. Minochair grappled with Kakuya. Both were locked in a deadly combat. Kakuya tilted his lance at the king's belt with such force that Minochair's Byzantine helmet wobbled on his head, and his mailed coat was torn up to the level of the belt, exposing his skin. Minochair struck at Kakuya's neck with his sword, cutting through the metal covering the neck. The ding-dong combat went on till midday without any result. Ding-dong combat. My goodness, really? That's the worst kind of combat. Ding-dong combat. It's horrible. The sun was about to set when the king, who was beginning to feel the strain of a strenuous day-long combat, made one supreme effort, caught hold of Kakuya's belt, lifted him up from the saddle with a mighty heave, and hurled him on the ground. While Kakuya lay stunned, Minochair ripped open his chest with his sword. Ferdowsi, commenting on Kakuya's death, says that it appeared as if he was born of his mother, especially for this evil day. Wow. Chapter 52. Salm's flight towards the fortress, and his death at the hands of Minochair. On seeing Kakuya's sad fate, Salm was disheartened. He emptied his head of all thoughts of avenging Tur's death. He rode furiously towards his fortress. The Iranian soldiers were hot in pursuit. Since the battlefield was strewn with numberless bodies of the slain, it was rather difficult to make one's way through the heaps of dead bodies. Minochair was bent on cutting off Salm's escape. With his head full of feelings of indignation and rage, he mounted a fresh steed, steered his course away from the heap of dead bodies, and galloped along the unobstructed path, hot in pursuit of Salm. As soon as he came within hearing distance,
He shouted at Salm, reminding him how the latter slew his own brother despicably, without any justification for the sake of the crown. Minochair assured him that his ambition was now going to be fulfilled, since Faridun had prepared a different kind of crown for him. The tree which Salm had planted was now bearing fruit. If the fruit was bitter, it was from the tree planted by Salm himself. As he uttered these words, he reached within striking distance of Salm, and cut off his head with one sweep of his sword over Salm's neck. The severed head was then fixed upon a spear, and held high for all to see. Minochair's soldiers were amazed at the tremendous strength of their king's sword arm. Salm's soldiers became demoralized like a flock of sheep without the shepherd, and scattered themselves to hide in various inaccessible places, such as forests and caves. They deputed a wise man who had the gift of the gab to approach Minochair with the request to spare their lives, since they had no personal animosity against him, but had fought dutifully as soldiers. Henceforth they were prepared to obey Minochair's orders. Minochair assured them that he had no personal grudge against the people of Byzantium, or Turkestan, or China. He had achieved his object of avenging Iraq's death, and was not interested in further bloodshed. He abhorred anything that was against the commands of God as being evil and inspired by Adaman. He exhorted them to lay down their arms and return to their native places, and carry out their pre-war avocations in peace. He ordered his soldiers to stop shedding further blood. The defeated soldiers praised Minochair for his sense of justice and fair play, and surrendered all their arms. Chapter 53. Minochair's letter to Faridun, along with Salm's head, and his return to Iran. In his letter to Faridun, Minochair praised Almighty God and invoked his blessings on Faridun. He gratefully pointed out that with the help of the resources placed at his disposal by Faridun, and by the grace of God, he had avenged the death of Iraq by slaying both the cowardly assassins. He was returning very soon in the wake of the letter, and would explain everything in detail personally. He dispatched Shirui to the fort to inspect the spoils of war, and to bring with him, on the backs of elephants, all that was fitting to be presented to Faridun. Minochair then started on his homeward journey. When he approached Tamisha, Faridun, who was anxious to see his great-grandson, made arrangements for a royal welcome. As soon as Minochair and his victorious army crossed the sea of Gilan and entered Sari, Faridun advanced on foot, with the multitude following him, to meet Minochair halfway. No sooner was Faridun's standard seen, Minochair's soldiers fell in line to present a guard of honor for Faridun's inspection. Minochair dismounted from his steed, kissed the ground, and praised Faridun for his noble qualities. Faridun embraced him, bade him sit, and spread his hand and fingers over his face out of filial affection. He then sent a courier to fetch Sam, son of Nariman. Faridun disclosed to Sam that his days were coming to a close, so he wanted to entrust young Minochair to his care for help and guidance at all times. He then placed in Minochair's hand, and that of the world champion knight Sam. Turning his face toward heaven, he addressed God, recalling his promise to humanity that he would always come to the help of the oppressed. Now that God had vouchsafed to Faridun full enjoyment of the crown, scepter, and throne, and had fulfilled all his desires and yearnings, Faridun no longer wanted to linger on in this world, and entreated God to take him away from this world to the other without any further delay. Meanwhile, Shirui came along with the spoils of war, all of which Faridun distributed among the soldiers when 10 days remained for the month of Meher to commence. Faridun puts the crown on Minochair's head and dies. Faridun asked Minochair to take his seat on the golden throne. With his own hands he put the crown on Minochair's head and gave him plenty of advice and wise counsel. Hereafter, the Kayanian tree began to wither, the tree being Faridun. All his time was spent in weeping profusely with the embalmed heads of the 3 kings before him. He felt very sad that due to the envious and revengeful nature of the 2 elder sons, all the 3 sons were killed in his lifetime. He thus pined away and died. His dead body was placed in the sitting position in a special dokma made of gold and lapis lazuli. His body was seated on an ivory throne over which hung a crown. All his subjects passed by in files to pay their last respect. The door of the dokma was then closed. Minochair went into mourning for a week. Ferdowsi once again comments upon the ephemerality of the world, how it keeps a person in pomp and privilege for some time, and then fells him the next moment. When such is the way of the world, what difference does it make if a person happens to be a king or a subject? He advises human beings not to imagine that they are going to live forever. He alone lives well who leaves behind a good name. An excellent lesson indeed. Chapter 55. Minochair ruled for 120 years. Minochair sits on the throne and follows the code of Faridun. On the 8th day, Minochair came out of mourning and put on the royal crown. All his knights greeted him on the auspicious occasion and wished him well. He ruled for 120 years with justice, fair play, generosity, and righteousness. In his proclamation to his troops, nobles, and the commoners, he declared that he would be exercising all the divine qualities as the circumstances demanded. He promised to uphold the Kavayani standard and to curb ruthlessly the activities of persons with evil design. Conscious and confident as he was of his own strength and abilities, he promised that he would always walk in fear of God and would never forget that he was just an ordinary creature of God. He regarded God as his provender, protector, and refuge. He vowed to follow the policy of Faridun and warned that he would never tolerate evil persons casting covetous eyes upon the hard-earned money and belongings of the poor, honest subjects. He would regard all such tyrants as worse than Ahriman. All the knights expressed profound appreciation of his noble ideals and sentiments. The world champion Sam sprang up on his feet and recalled how Minochair had displayed valor in numerous battles and had given short shrift to many a tyrant. He now requested Minochair to rest on his throne in peace and to entrust all fighting to his generals, including Sam himself. Sam pointed out that from the days of his grandfather Garshasp, his forebears had always guarded and fought for the throne of Iran. He would carry on the family traditions exactly in the same manner. And so yet another war comes to an end, with yet another king crowned, as the old one draws his last breath. A lovely story, to be sure.
Chapter 56. Account of the birth of Zal-e-Zar, and Sam's casting him on the Elber's mountain. For a long time Sam had no son. He became infatuated with a lovely maiden in his harem, and hoped that she would bear him a son. In due course she conceived and gave birth to a lovely boy, whose skin was as white as silver, but the amazing part was that the hair of his head was absolutely white, just as in an old man or an anime protagonist. Nobody carried this news to Sam for a week, since everyone was afraid to tell him that he had a senile baby. I'm sorry, what? At last a wise nurse picked up sufficient courage and broke the news to Sam. She told him that the child was perfect in every respect, except that he had silver white hair on his head, and the fine down on his body was also white. She advised Sam was not to get disappointed, but to accept it gratefully as a gift from God and anime. Sam saw the baby, the likes of which none had heard of nor seen before. Sam felt very disappointed because he was afraid of the taunts of people at his having such a son. He looked towards heaven and asked God what crime he had committed that he should be blessed with such a son who looked like an offspring of Ariman. That's racist. How was he to bear up with the taunts and laughter of his fellow knights when they saw such a child? He wondered whether it would not be advisable for him to abandon Iran and go elsewhere. In his excitement, he ordered his servants to take away the infant to a far-off place and abandon him there. Wow, some knight you are, Sam. Seriously. For all he knew, that baby could have been the Persian Gojo. And yet, he decided to treat him like the Persian Hephaestus. How sad indeed. The servants carried the baby to the Elber's mountain and abandoned it there on the top. The innocent infant laid there, uncared for many days. Ferdowsi here deplores the callousness of Sam in casting off his own offspring, and quotes a lioness telling her cub that even if she were to give the blood of her heart to the cub, she would not be conferring the least obligation on the cub, because she loved the cub as passionately as she loved her own heart, and it would break her heart to see the cub leave her protection and go elsewhere. Ferdowsi laments that even wild animals love their offspring more intensely than do human beings. The abandoned baby spent its time in sucking the thumb and in crying from time to time. The rough rock was its cradle and the dust its wet nurse. The body was quite naked and the lips parched. The hot sun was at the zenith. Ferdowsi exclaims it would have been better if the infant's parents had been panthers, because it would have had protection from the hot sun at least. The Elber's mountain was the haunt of the Simur, a large, fabulous bird which had its nest there. Whenever its young ones felt hungry, the Simurgh flew out of its nest to bring food for its young. As it flew out of its customary food hunting expedition, it spotted the abandoned baby. It swooped down, plucked up the tiny infant in its gigantic talons, and carried him to its nest in the instinctive hope that its young ones would devour the baby. But God had other plans about the baby's future. He instilled feelings of love in the Simurgh's heart. When God makes up his mind to protect someone, what does it matter if anyone abandons him or her? The Simurgh heard an inner voice asking it to protect the child, since it was destined to be the forebear
of a family of the most powerful knights in the world. Strangely enough, the Simurgh's young ones also gazed with eyes full of wonder at the infant and did not harm him. The Simurgh used to bring exceptionally soft prey for its foster child, so that the tender baby could swallow it directly without sucking or chewing. Many years passed in this manner. The baby grew up to be a handsome, strong young boy. Caravans used to pass along the mountain. The traders of the caravans noted that the baby resembled Sam very much. They carried this news wherever they went. Ferdowsi remarks that neither good nor bad remains a secret in this world. Nariman's Sam dreams of Zal. One night Nariman's Sam had gone to bed with a heavy heart, thinking of the circumstances which impelled him to abandon his baby on the mountain. He dreamt that from the country of Hind, India, a man astride a steed came galloping up to him. The rider had a noble bearing and appeared to be a full-fledged knight. He gave Sam pleasant tidings about his cast-off son, especially about his physical development. When Sam woke up, he sent for the wise men of his court, revealed to them the nature of his dream, and also the news that he had heard from the caravans that passed over Elburz mountain. He asked them to advise him whether it was possible that his son could be alive, or had died of exposure to the cold and the hot sun. The wise men, both old and young, replied with one voice that whoever loses faith in the greatness and goodness of God is no longer able to differentiate between right and wrong. Panthers and lions, whether on the earth or over the mountains, as also fishes and alligators in the water, all love and protect their offspring, and offer thanks to the Creator for blessing them with issue. I feel like that's a gross overgeneralization. There's a lot of animals that kill or are indifferent to their own offspring. Like, a lot of them. They told Sam without mincing words that he was breaking God's commandment by throwing away his innocent infant just because he had white hairs on his otherwise lovely body. They exhorted him not to run away from his parental obligations by seeking refuge in doubts about his son still being alive, but to gird up his loins and make an all-out search for his son. One whom God protects can never be destroyed by exposure to cold or heat, so they advised him to beg forgiveness of God for so cruelly casting off his son. It was decided that Sam should proceed toward Elburz mountain the next day in search of his son, and in case he succeeded in finding him, to make amends for his filial lapse. I would not call that a filial lapse. I would call that abusive parenting. The sort of thing that CPS really should be looking into. I guess the Persian Empire didn't have CPS in those days. At least they had a very cool bird that helped to protect children. Chapter 58. Sam sees Zal in his dream for the second time, and proceeds to Elber's mountain in search of him. One night Sam dreamt once again that from the mountain of Hind, Hindu Kush, a flag was being raised high. A handsome slave came into view. A large army followed him. On his left hand was a holy man, and on his right a wise, dignified individual. One of the two persons approached Sam and gave vent to some hard truths. He admonished Sam for being so heartless and callous, and for washing away from his eyes all sense of shame and fear of God. If Sam wanted to keep a bird as a nurse for his infant, then what was the use of calling himself a knight? If Sam regarded white hairs as something evil, then he himself had plenty of them on his head. God had blessed him with a precious gift which he so callously cast away. He should call himself an infidel, since he was wavering in his allegiance to God, the same God who was now protecting the infant that he had cast off. No nurse could ever be more efficient than God, and Sam himself could never hope to develop as much love for his son as God had. Sam woke up from the dream roaring like a mighty lion that is caught in a trap. He feared that God would punish him for his misdeed. He sent for all the wise men and the officers of his army, and proceeded at once to the mountain to search for him whom he had abandoned. He saw a peak rising as high as the Pleiades and pulling down the stars, as if... Wait, what? And pulling down the stars. On the top of it was a huge nest made out of ebony and sandalwood, interwoven with strips of the wood of aloes. It was in such an inaccessible spot as to be beyond the influence of the planet Saturn. A young man resembling Sam stood at the entrance and strolled around the nest. On seeing him, Sam praised God and rubbed his cheeks on the ground as a mark of servitude to God and out of wonder at God's creation of such a mighty bird. He realized God's omnipotence and entertained no thoughts about God being greater than the greatest. He tried to find out if there was a way leading up to the nest, but it seemed to be so inaccessible that not even the sure-footed mountain goat or any other wild animal could reach it. He prayed God to show him a way to get access to the boy, if he indeed was his son, and not the offspring of the accursed Ahriman. He expressed his heartfelt contrition for his sins, and implored God to restore his son to him. Bro, you're still doubting even now? You really do not deserve to be a parent. Really, I mean, you want access to the boy only if he's your son? He could just be some random kid. You're really going to just leave him if he's some random kid? Is that what you would do? That's kind of messed up. Chapter 59. Simurgh carries Zal to Sam. No sooner did Sam cry out from the anguish of his heart than his heartfelt prayer was accepted. Simurgh looked down from the top of the mountain at Sam and his companions. He felt sure in his mind that they had come in search of the boy, and had no evil intentions toward the Simurgh. Simurgh then told Sam's son that he had nursed him all these years and had been his well-wisher. He now named the boy Dastan-e-Zal, since the father had played a trick with the son. Since the same father had now come to take his son away, he offered to hand him over to the parent without any harm. When the young man heard this from Simurgh, his eyes were full of tears and his heart heavy. He asked Simurgh why he got tired of him. He had been quite happy in the nest, and felt quite safe under his two wings. Simurgh consoled him that now the time had come for the boy to be in touch with the royal court, and assured him that once he got used to his new way of living he would soon forget about the nest. It was not on account of any ill feeling that he was restoring the boy to his father, but just because that would prove better for the boy in the long run than the present mode of existence. He gave the boy a feather from his body that would constantly remind him of Simurgh, and the fact that Simurgh had brought him up along with his own young ones. He told the boy that should he ever experience any difficulty, all he had to do was hold the feather in a fire. Simurgh would then come and carry him, instantly, to his abode without the slightest harm. After exhorting the boy not to forget him, he lifted the boy and carried him to his father. The boy's white hairs had grown so long as to extend below his chest. Sam wept copiously on seeing his son. Bowing his head before Simurgh, he addressed him as the king of birds, and said that God had given him such strength and grace, and so that he may always come to the rescue of the oppressed. He prayed that Simurgh's enemies may always come to grief, and that he may ever remain strong and powerful. Simurgh then flew back to his nest. Sam then had a close look at his son. Apart from the white hairs, he did not discern any other defect. In all other respects, he was fit to grace the royal court with his presence, and to wield the sword in defense of the king. Sam became very happy. He begged of his son to forget the past and to not have any hard feelings towards him. So you're asking the impossible right after you meet him as an adult, not a baby for the first time. Now that you've been told straight up that you're kind of a jerk father, now you want to do better. How shameless.
I mean, really. Even Endeavor wasn't so shameless as to ask his kids to forgive him. He just did his best to atone. Anyways, Sam promised that henceforth he would fulfill all the boy's desires and would not prevent him from doing anything that he wanted. He then dressed the boy in a knight's attire, and on reaching the foot of the mountain made him mount a horse. Sam's retinue escorted him to the beat of drums and blowing of bugles, happily to Sam's city. Chapter 60. Mino Chair comes to know of Sam's arrival with Zal, and sends Navzar to call them. News reached Mino Chair from Zabul that Sam returned in triumph from the mountain. Mino Chair was very happy and thanked God. He had 2 sons, both of whom were brave, wise, and noble. One was named Navzar and the other Zarasp. He instructed Navzar to proceed immediately to Sam's abode. After contacting Sam's son, Navzar was there to greet him and invite him to see the king in order to acquaint him with the quaint details of what he had undergone, and then to go back to Zabul to follow in his father's footsteps. Quaint details, huh? I wouldn't call being thrown away on a mountain to die a mere quaint detail. I call that abandonment. As soon as Sam saw Navzar coming, he got down from his steed. They embraced each other and exchanged greetings. Sam inquired about the king and his knights. Navzar conveyed their message. On hearing the king's message, Sam kissed the earth and lost no time in proceeding to the royal court, with Zal-e-Zad seated upon a stately elephant. When Mino Chair heard that Sam's party had reached the outskirts of the capital,
he stepped out with his forces to welcome Sam. As soon as Sam saw Minochair's standard, he dismounted, kissed the earth, and offered felicitations to the king. Minochair asked him to remount his steed. The cavalcade then made its way to the royal palace. The king sat in state upon the throne, and wore the Kayani's crown. Karan and Sam sat on either side of the king. On the instructions of the king, Zal was decked with a golden mace and a golden helmet, and ushered in before the king. Minochair saw Zal with eyes full of wonder, and told Sam that the boy was peerless, what with his muscular, stately physique and his handsome looks. He advised Sam to regard Zal as a precious charge entrusted to him by the king, and to not injure his feelings in any way, and not to be happy except in his presence. That last one seems a bit excessive, but warranted, given the way Sam treated his child. He said that Zal possessed all Kayani's characteristics, and that Sam should now teach him all about the ways of warfare, as well as how to bear himself in banquets and assemblies, because Zal had been brought up by Simurgh on top of the mountain, and had been out of touch with the world. Sam then revealed to Minochair the story of Zal, how he decided to abandon him, how he was brought up by the Simurgh, how God made him go in search of his lost son, how he was in despair on seeing the inaccessible nest, how on praying sincerely to God to show him a way to reach Zal, his prayer was instantly answered. Simurgh brought Zal before Sam, and having left the son with the father, flew away. At the king, chapter 61. Wise men cast Zal's horoscope, and Sam returns with the Zal-e-Azar to Zabulistan. At the king's behest, wise men and astrologers cast Zal's horoscope, and told the king that Zal was destined to be a renowned knight. The king now made elaborate preparations to give a grand send-off to Sam and Zal. Costly gifts such as Arabian steeds with golden reins and bits, swords of Indian steel encased in golden scabbards, woolen and silk dress material, carpets, rubies, and other jewels, slaves attired in Byzantine silk interwoven with pearls and golden threads. Really? Why on earth did it have to be slaves? Why on earth did you have slaves? Disgusting. Plates made of lapis lazuli, wine cups made of turquoise, silver and gold, and filled with musk, camphor, and saffron. Also arms such as mailed coats, helmets, mailed cover for the saddles and for the horses' necks, lances, swords, maces, thrones made of turquoise and golden crowns, ruby seals and golden belts were offered to Sam. That seems like a bit excessive for a child abandoner. Minochair then wrote out a document conferring upon Sam's suzerainty over Kabul, Dambar, and Amai in India, and all the land extending from China Sea to the river Indus, and from Zabulistan to Bast. All that just for having a son, abandoning him, and then going out to reclaim him, asking him to forgive him. Goodness sakes.
Sam thanked and pranked Minochair profusely, and prayed for his long life and prosperity. He then left for Zabul with his retinue. As soon as the party reached Nimroz, another name for Zabul city, Sam's associates decorated the whole of Sistan, another name for Zabulistan, and scattered musk, saffron, gold coins, and pearls over the members of the returning party. The city wore a festive appearance, and rulers from far and near came to welcome Sam and to felicitate him on his triumphant return with Zal. Sam sent for the most highly learned scholars and skilful warriors from wherever they could be found, and entrusted Zal to their care for instruction and learning, as well as in the art and skill of warfare. He himself had to proceed immediately to Kargasar and Mazandaran on an expedition, as per the king's orders. He acquainted the instructors with Zal's history, how he was abandoned on the mountain and was brought up with Simurgh's young ones. Now the instructors had to train him up to deal with the problems of statecraft and warfare. He then advised Zal to stay happily until Sam's return from the expedition. Zal felt it sad that he had to be separated from Sam again, in spite of the fact that all these years he had spent his life among the birds, away from human habitation. Sam consoled him and advised him to profit by the instructions that would be given to him, and to acquire as much knowledge as was possible. Extolling the virtues of knowledge, he said that a learned enemy was, any day, preferable to an ignorant friend. He embraced Zal and set out on his expedition. Zal accompanied him until 2 stages of the journey and returned. He took full advantage of the instructions given, and after completing his education, he decided to go on an excursion to Kabul, Dambar, Marg, and Mai. With a few select companions, he set out and camped in Kabul, which was the first stage of his travels. My goodness. Sam really is a worse father than Goku. Chapter 62. Story of Zal and Merab of Kabul, and Zal's falling in love with Rudaba, daughter of Merab. Kabul was ruled by a king called Merab, who had perfect physique and was handsome to look at. He had the wisdom of a sage and the strength of a knight. He traced his ancestry to Zahak, not that guy, and ruled over the province of Kabul, and paid an annual tribute to Sam as an acknowledgement of the latter's suzerainty over his kingdom. When Merab came to know of Zal's visit to his province, he brought costly gifts, such as saddled steeds, slaves, not again, gold coins, rubies, musk, incense, cloth interwoven with gold threads, wool and silk, gold necklace inlaid with topaz. Along with the chieftains of his kingdom and his army, he set forth to honor Zal. Zal welcomed Merab in a befitting manner and gave a banquet in his honor. Merab and Zal admired each other. Each was favorably impressed with the other's personality. After Merab retired to his tent, Zal made no secret of his admiration, and told his companions accordingly, whereupon one of the companions got up, and said that Merab had a daughter of surpassing beauty and loveliness, and he talked in such glowing terms of her physical charms that Zal fell head over heels in love with her, even though he had not seen her. He passed a restless night. The following morning Merab visited him again. He told Merab to ask any favor of him that he liked. Merab said that his only desire was that Zal should visit his abode and be his guest. Zal replied that it was not possible for him to do so, because neither the king nor Sam would approve of it, since Merab was an idol worshipper. Merab took leave after praising Zal outwardly,
but cursed him inwardly for turning down his invitation. Zal once expressed his admiration for Merab's grand personality, whereupon his companions, who hitherto had spoken derisively of him as an idol worshipper, now started singing Merab's praises. This stimulated Zal's longing for Merab's daughter to the point of craziness. Ferdowsi here relates what an Arab warrior once declared, that as long as he was alive his horse was his partner, and the open earth his resting place. He did not covet a bride, lest he may get lost in her love and become the butt of wise men's ridicule. I'm sorry, what? Really? That seems kind of ridiculous. Zal, however, went on pining after Merab's daughter. Seriously. Chapter 63. Rudaba falls in love with Zal and seeks the advice of her maids. One morning, Merab, deeply absorbed in thought about the manly and knight-like qualities of Zal, was walking towards the ladies' wing of his palace when he saw Rudaba and Sindukt. He was struck by the beauty and loveliness of Rudaba and thanked God for it. Okay, that's kind of weird. Sindukt asked Merab how he had fared during his visit to Zal, what type of man Zal was, whether he had any human qualities, whether he still pined for Simurg, what he was to look at, what was his physique like. I think what she's basically trying to ask is he some sort of weird bird man, or is he like human and stuff? In reply, Merab told his wife that Zal had the heart of a lion and the strength of an elephant. He was equally at home in court and on the battlefield. The only extraordinary thing that one could point out was his white hairs, but even these suited him admirably and made him look attractive. Well, then perhaps you should marry him. When Rudaba heard her father's description of Zal, she instantly felt attracted towards him and lost all hunger and sleep. Wow, these guys really do not know how love works, do they? Ferdowsi here remarks that whenever desire takes the place of wisdom, the whole aspect changes. He advises men not to talk of men in the presence of ladies, since a lady's heart is vulnerable to the onslaught of emotions. That's sexist. Like, really sexist. Very sexist, in fact. Rudaba had 5 faithful maids in waiting. She took them into confidence about her love for Zal. The maids tried their best to dissuade Rudaba from loving Zal by pointing out that offers had come for her from far-off places like Kamnauj and Mai, since the fame of her beauty had spread from India to China, whereas Zal had been brought up among birds and had white hairs like an old man. Rudaba lost her temper with them and affirmed her determination to give her heart to none else but Zal. When the maids saw her grim determination, they promised to do their best to bring the lovers together. I think that's a good place to stop for the night. It looks like we are on the verge of a love story. A very, very weird love story. It should be rather interesting to see what love among
Persian mythology was like. In any case, I don't think we'll be doing any raiding tonight. So I think we shall simply end it here. I hope that everyone who joined us tonight had a good time and was able to find their insomnia defeated. That's all for tonight. Dismissed, soldiers.